My name is Gavin Dawson. I'm the client partner at Sparity. As the pandemic continues, I hope everyone are healthy and strong. We usually do our webinars on Zoom. Unfortunately, there was some issues with Zoom, and we are experimenting with Microsoft Teams for this webinar, and it's our first time using Teams. If you come across any technical glitch, kindly bear with us. So today's topic is the shift in the threat model. So while all of us are trying to be safe by practicing social distancing, working from home, and following other preventive measures, cyber criminals are using COVID-19 as a bait for cyber threats. And at Sparity, we support a lot of clients in the cybersecurity space. And in the recent times, we have seen a spike in phishing attacks, malware, ransomware attacks, data breaches, and so on. Today, Jeff Surratt, our head of cybersecurity, would be sharing his views and learnings how COVID-19 is impacting or causing various challenges in the cybersecurity space and the drastic shift in the threat landscape. A very brief introduction about Jeff. Jeff has over 20 years of experience working with various public and private companies in the cybersecurity space. Before heading Sparity Cybersecurity Division, he had worked with CenturyLink as a key architecture advisor, helping multinational clients in the areas of risk, governance, and compliance. Also, Jeff has worked in the federal, in the government space, NCIS, Naval Criminal Investigative Service. He had roles in counterintelligence, force protection, supply chain risk, and collaboration with defense agencies. So with this brief introduction, we shall get started with today's webinar. So if you have any questions during the presentation, please reserve them from the end. Jeff would answer them. You could post your questions in the chat box, or at the end of the presentation, you could unmute yourself and ask questions. So over to you, Jeff.
Thank you, Gavin. Hello, everybody. I hope everybody's doing good, and I guess good evening over there. Where I'm in Japan, it's a good morning. But let's go ahead and get started. So before we go into what's going on in 2020, I just wanted to give you a recap of the end of 2019. At the end of this year, I think we're going to find everything's going to be a little different. So the most important thing.
Well, the other thing is not to get into that. Another approach might be to say, hey, we, you raised this issue. We recognize that it is. Let's take it offline to see what adjustments.
Hello?
Yeah, a friendly reminder to all the attendees. Since I know that everyone has access to the mics, kindly mute yourself. Yeah, Jeff, you could go ahead. Sorry.
All right, I'm going to proceed. So one of the important things over last year was that the total number of data breaches was up 17%, whereas in 2018 it was down. This goes back to the model where it was increasing every year. And excuse me, a little dry. The average cost of a data breach in the US was $8 million. The time to detect in the US is a little high, about 197 days, and around 53 days to contain it once it's discovered. This is pretty high. The world average for threat detection is around 160 days, so about a month less. The major issues were vendors, third-party risk, hacking accounts, and data breaches at 39%, and unauthorized access 36%. One of the largest issues last year was Operation Soft Cell, which 10 global telephone companies were breached, and it was to steal specific user data, which basically means that, say, maybe they had names and numbers from OPM, the Office of Personnel Management hack from years ago, or one of the other ones from the previous year might have provided them data for individuals. The main people last year being breached or looking for information were the CISO, the Chief Operating Officer, and the Chief Accountant for companies. And over the course of the end of the year, there were several surveys. This is just a brief recap of some of them combined. The main issue was visibility into what's going on with the network, and the least was post-breach detection. Now that I'm not actually sure of. That's the way the information compiled, but I think there were some industries, some silos that didn't participate. So the other issue around that is the lack of threat intelligence. Threat intelligence really came to the forefront around 4 years ago, and some of the companies haven't had the access to trained individuals. Individuals usually would go through a SOC 1, SOC 2, SOC 3, Security Operations Center method of getting promoted, and or somebody like myself, somebody coming from the Cyber Counterintelligence Division, would move into that. The other issue is around preventative defenses, and we're going to touch into that a little bit later on. So let's talk about 2020. We're not that far into it, but it's definitely been interesting to say the least. So key issue so far is that cyber attacks are going up 30%, and that 30% is every month, not year over year. There have been a 600% increase by the end of February with traditional impersonation scams, also with business email compromise, and we'll talk about later on the extortion attacks. There have also been a lot more focused email, mainly to businesses, individuals who are working from home, and the older generation receiving phishing emails. And it has basically gone up. In some cases, some companies have said 6 times higher than the 37%. So I did not actually catch which industries those were, but that is pretty high. So we're already about 80% higher total so far than last year. The other issue is recreational hackers. So we used to call them script kiddies back in the day, but they now have a new release of Kali Linux, and Kali Linux is a tool, an operating system that's actually used by many hackers, but it's also used by Red Team. So this new edition has basically compiled some of the things that used to be more complex into basic execution by clicking an icon. So that has once again invited kids, teenagers sitting at home to try their hand with what's going on. Basically, they're thinking, oh, well, all the security people, all the cyber experts are working from home. Two, they may not have access to their environment. And so far, there's been fake goods associated with the current crisis, and so far, 14 million worth of goods have been seized, returned. Also, interesting enough, there have been a lot of increased TV usage, looking up gardening and things like that. I just add that in as a point of interest. So there are a lot of issues with remote connectivity. So mainly with hospitals, VPN appliances, new breaches have come up, and there is a new version of Revel, which is mainly geared towards just attacking VPNs. And that goes directly into repurposing malware to target healthcare as a whole. Interesting note here is that a lot of the alliances with cybercrime basically said, okay, healthcare is a problem, we're not going to touch with them. And they actually said that in a release. Now, apparently, the other side of the house, the counterintelligence teams for China, Russia, North Korea, they're not agreeing to that. Mainly for pharmaceuticals and healthcare, they're trying to see what maybe we are doing to handle COVID-19, and also see what other interesting formulas they could find. There are a lot of various drugs that already exist that are being tested. So mainly they're after that type of information. We'll talk about APT41, Double Dragon, in a minute. They are one of the most active now, whereas before they had kind of went to sleep for a little while. They're also the most advanced in Chinese hackers. And Microsoft issued advice looking at the architecture and design for remote access as a whole. And they asked that Windows users stop using the regular Office and start using Office 365 in as many environments as they can. So that brings us into remote conferencing. Overall, and we're talking about, let's see, this started in February and March, there were 3,300 new domains issued that had the word Zoom in it, of which about 67% were created in March alone, and 30% were used solely for phishing. So that's quite an increase there as well. So overall, we're basically 4 months into the year, and we're already beginning to hit numbers for the whole year of 2019. And cyber criminals are definitely trying to capitalize on it. There are also other issues with fake subscriptions being sent to Zoom itself in order to steal money. So many users can steal Zoom, can use Zoom for free, but the fake emails are asking for money to pay to use Zoom, and they're leading directly to that 30% of domains. So some of the issues with Zoom are that it has many, many, many vulnerabilities, and it didn't come to light until there were well over 3,000 new users. So right now, Windows, Microsoft are recommending that everybody update to version 4.6.9, which is the latest version, and it contains a fair number of patches, but not everything. And Zoom has actually come forward last week and said they're still working on some of the issues. Now, that hasn't stopped many organizations, education organizations, some governments, some powers, to just completely stop using it. There have been a lot of stolen passwords. There was a large issue with Mac malware that would actually grant administrative access to Mac laptops and things like that, things that people would usually use to work from home. The other thing is there were many recorded Zoom meetings that were found in the dark web for sale. Or in some cases, they were just take a look at this and giving them away. The other thing that was called out is an issue, but not really a big issue. The Zoom servers, they said were using AES 256. When all this started, they actually looked and they were using AES 128. So they got called to the carpet on that. Now, there really isn't a big issue. You still would have to spend, using a standard analysis, about 7,000 years to break AES 128. So we're not there yet. Also, there were several CVEs. I didn't go into them in detail, but I listed them here so you could look them up later, that identify the individual issues that have come up. But I did include the flaw directly for VMware server because many of the corporations that we interact with use VMware. So I called that out. And the ability to do unpromoted microphone usage and camera usage can be activated without the presenter's approval. The other issue is that if a user got kicked, it was just a username that got kicked. So they could change their username and join the meeting again and again and again to get what they were after. The other issue with Zoom is the fact, and it's highlighted at the bottom, that Zoom users, the personal data, can be up for sale, and actually says that in the contract that most people don't pay attention to whenever they start using Zoom. So name, phone number, Zoom account, all wide open if somebody were to contact Zoom and say, I want this information. And of course, they're selling it. So I already mentioned Double Dragon. Again, it's a Chinese advanced persistent threat. And the reason why it's called Double Dragon by us is because during the day, they're basically counterintelligence hackers. But this is the only APT that the Chinese government will let work freelance at night or on the weekends. And that means that some of the data that they steal that may not be something that China's after, they can be selling it. And the money will go directly to them, not to China. And the main reason why they have gotten so interested again is because right now China operates on a 5-year plan in order to estimate economic growth, to put what the Chinese party is going to be doing over the next 5 years. Basically, it's just a plan for economy, for industry, for our goals, for import, all of that information. But the issue starting back in actually it was November with COVID-19 caused them not to have their annual meeting. And so that's about the time that APT 41 started actually operating. So we've theorized that they actually came to the forefront again because they're taking the time to collect additional information that can be used in the 5-year plan. From basic interference and, I talked about stealing again of information. Right now, APT 41 is focusing on, of course, on healthcare, pharmaceuticals, retail, travel services, and education. One of the things that they were doing with education is they were actually monitoring Zoom. Mainly this is because the education systems will, like if it's a college level education, say it was, doctorate degree in pharmacy or a doctorate degree in healthcare of any type, they would actually be looking for the information related to COVID-16. But back in the day, APT41 actually started stealing video game information and setting up basically ways to get into telecoms, steal video game information. And this was a long time ago. This is back in 2012 when I was back with NCIS. And back then we didn't pay much attention to them other than to watch the way they do things and the way they adapt very quickly. So over the last year and a half, they have actually operated in 14 countries. And most notably in Singapore. In Singapore, they actually got into Google accounts and were stealing stored information. As also Double Dragon are probably some of the quickest respondees to being discovered. So the last paragraph I'll let you read on your own, but basically they were found, they were kicked out, and all they had to do was 2 weeks later come up with a new phishing scheme, send it in, and within days following that they were back online with the same company. So this is a look at APT41 Double Dragon since 2012. Again, I already mentioned 2012 they started with video games. 2013 they kind of expanded themselves, expanded again on 14, 15, and then 16 was one of their most interesting years because that's when they branched into pharmaceutical. And again, this is probably why, and I'm only stipulating, that they came back to the forefront in November, December of last year, and have been a focus ever since, is the pharmaceutical industry. 2018, they kind of had a shift again. 2019, again, I told you they kind of went to sleep and didn't do much. Here we're in 2020, which hasn't been actually listed yet. So the boxes highlighted in red are my prediction. They're not an official prediction, that as the year goes by, they're going to focus on just about everything. So I've red boxed part of 2017, 16, and 15 to demonstrate what I predict their activity is going to be. Right now, again, they're focused on healthcare, pharmaceuticals, high tech, and telecoms. So some of right now, I know this list is long, I'll let you read it on your own. But mainly, they have breached over in the telecoms again, as predicted, with mobile phones. So again, they freelance, so there's interest in Bitcoin to unlock. There are malware for both iPhone and Androids. And in the iPhone region, it's mainly due to users that will click a link. So they've expanded some of the phishing to go directly into iPhones. And we'll talk about that again in a minute. So basic remote security. So this is what you would normally think about from a work from home culture. So when you work from home, you may have your corporate laptop, but you may have your own desktop, you may have your own laptop, or in some cases, your company might have issued you a cell phone. And again, most commonly issued cell phone is an iPhone. So basically, the focus is on a way that the company can monitor these devices like they would normally inside. And in most cases, they can't. The other issue is when you're using Office 365. Of course, you can access that from any computer because you're going directly to your account. The only problem with that is you may be using your home computer and your home computer may not be secured, or dipping it onto unsecured networks, most people will use Wi-Fi of some type inside their house. And the Wi-Fi is not as secure as corporate Wi-Fi may or may not be. So basically, if you are using Office 365 over your Wi-Fi, somebody could man in the middle of the Wi-Fi, or you might have moved 3 or 4 times and you have the same router that you bought 3 or 4 years ago, which hasn't been patched in forever. And so they can, individual, whether it was a cyber criminal or if it's a counterintelligence group that's interested in you, they could get in that way. Again, we talked about centralized document sharing, Office 365. When I talked about Singapore being hacked, it was actually Google Drive. And it was actually pretty bad because that year, Singapore, which hardly ever loses money, lost about $35 million over the course of the year, which actually for them is kind of significant. And then you have the unintentional breaches where, say you have set up your information to be, public, private, like for the government, it was always public information, compartmentalized information, and then top secret information. You may actually have a family member who fires up that same computer you've been using to do something and talk on Facebook. They might be the ones that get lured into clicking the link, and at that point your computer's compromised depending on the security level that you have. So right now, most security professionals are saying only use what you've been issued, especially since the cybersecurity divisions and the networking divisions don't have any access into what you're doing. They can only teach you what you should and should not be doing. Right now, I know, for instance, I'm actually in Japan right now. There was a company here in Japan that had a user go to, I think it was either a Starbucks or a Tully's, and they found out later on that the person's corporate laptop now had a virus. So securing the work from home environment is something that is difficult to do, especially when everybody is now working from home. So before, an organization with the size of 500 employees would only have about 35 to 65 employees working from home. Now everybody is working from home. So they have to deal with the load, they have to deal with the cybersecurity training, and essentially they just have to assume that a breach is going to happen. Because of the work from home situation, increases the risk about threefold to the organization. And the one thing that needs to be reinforced is we are now in April, and normal cybersecurity training for the companies that I've been with has always occurred around January with a 3-month grace period. So we're ending the grace period right now. So one of the things that you can do right away to help the work from home situation is to actually force the cybersecurity training to happen now and modify it such that it can be done from home. And cybersecurity training is not something that needs to be, compartmentalized or not public. Most training is going to cover very generic issues. And then if maybe you do have some inside information associated with that, just have the communication department or whoever is, the primary responsibility, modify that and show it. But right now, we're predicting that work from home is going to go all the way through June, regardless of what the president would like to think. And that is actually going to happen in pretty much every country. And that goes into, even if you have employees that work overseas, they need to be trained as well. Granted, their network infrastructure is going to be different, their time zone is going to be different, but like me, I'm over here in Japan. I'm in basically the same time zone as China, so they don't have to stay up late to hunt for my information. So this isn't a network training, but just real quickly, and I'm not going to go over this, in detail, but you have basically three types of companies. So you have the small company that may be just doing the remote access with very little security, and that's the external connectivity with little protection. And that diagram is basically how that would be organized. Then you have the mid-tier to brand new large tier corporation, and they're going to go with employee access, DMZ, multi-factor authentication, those types of things. And they're going to be a little more secure, but again, I already said that if somebody like APT41, Double Dragon wants to get in, the first thing they're going to do is phish. And basically the phishing that they do is not blanket. They will actually research the person. They will actually research the person for a long duration and see what they may or may not have information on from that individual and go from there. So for instance, when I worked with NCIS and the OPM hack took place, part of my responsibility was a lot of travel inside Asia because my actual home was here in Japan. And so once the OPM hack took place and they had the information for several months, one of the first places I had to go to was China. And my experience was less than happy, although it wasn't that great. I went up, presented my passport. Within 5 minutes, I was put to the side. And I ended up spending a lovely night in the airport with really no place to sleep. And every hour on the hour, somebody would come in and ask me questions. And then the next person would come in and ask the same questions. And I was there for 24 hours. And the reason for that is the tireder you get, the more likely you are to stumble. So one of the things that we were taught was to always give the same answer and not necessarily the truth. But that can happen. They will do that much research. And right now, actually, as I said, the research is on the COO, the CISO, and so on. And right now, again, with the work from home, they already know who you are. They probably already know your phone number. Using that information, they can extrapolate your address and go from there. So they'll know where you're at. They'll probably know most likely you're in this region. So Verizon is your, or you're over in Colorado. So CenturyLink is actually your support. And try to go in that way. Hey, Gavin?
Yes.
I think you took control because I can't move the slides.
No.
Sorry, folks, for the interruption. This is one of those first go around.
Can you try that?
Sorry again. Gavin, if you just have control, then just move the slide.
Jeff, I don't have control.
Somebody has control and it isn't me.
Okay, probably can you just stop and reshare again? Yes, please.
I'm sorry, what did you say?
Can you stop and reshare your screen?
I cannot do anything, you know. There we go. Again, sorry folks for the interruption. Like you said, we're just experimenting here since we can't actually use. So after discussing all those issues, I just want to briefly go over what we can do to help your situation. So Surratt is a small company. We've been operating for 10 years. Started out with data transformation, blockchain, and expanded into consultants for IT and security. And I was brought on last year to cover the security aspect of things. And actually, when I worked for CenturyLink, I was actually a Surratt contractor. So we're following the exact framework that is put on by OWASP. So we're following identify, protect, detect, respond, and recover. What we need to talk about right now is detection and identification. So one of the things that we can focus on is take your industry silo, look over the past year and look at the attacks that have been performed against that silo, and then narrow the focus down. So if you are siloed into medical and healthcare, part of that is going to be insurance. So if you're an insurance organization, you're in the medical and healthcare, we'll start at the beginning and narrow it down to what is going on in your specific industry, and then look and see who in your industry has been targeted and attacked before, and make recommendations to you based on that. Respond is going to be one of the issues that everybody's going to have a problem with, because they're not working on the inside, and most of the time network security people, cybersecurity people are only going to be able to do so much from the outside. Now, obviously, if your people are local, all they would have to do is go into the office. But in this case, many of your network support people, many of your cybersecurity people may be in a different location. Like I said, sometimes, you know, the companies here, like Honda, have had issues before. Actually, Honda's been breached 4 times in the last 3 years, but their network support team for Honda over here is in the US. And so you have a 13-hour time difference. So if something were to happen, response is going to be very low, as well as recover. And again, recovery takes about 50, 60 days, but then it would take them until the end of the year to probably even know what happened. And then for protect, maybe you need somebody to actually do the learning. So we could actually do another Zoom, take your training, take the knowledge that we have and pull it together, and then actually do a cyber awareness training class for you. We can also do remote scans, so penetration testing. I don't know why it keeps jumping. So from the outside, annually, most companies are supposed to have some type of penetration test to go along with their annual compliance report. So in many instances, especially the small companies or the up-and-coming medium companies, don't have the staff or the ability to do that in this type of situation. We could also do that, give you the report, and make it compliant with your annual audit format. And again, this kind of goes into the analytics. We can help you detect, we can help you prevent by providing advisory services. But the predictive and response are really going to have to come from data you may not have access to at this point in time. So we can look at your during attack, we can look at your post-attack, but the pre-attack analysis is going to take some time. And that goes back to the 100+ days of analysis, and you may have not noticed it in time. But one of the earlier slides that I showed said that if you can do everything within 100 days, then you'll at least save $1 million. And while I'm talking about money, let me jump back to one of the slides because I didn't really. Well, anyway, there was a company that had the most expensive cyber breach that any other company had last year. So they were breached with ransomware, and they ended up paying the ransom. The ransom was $90 million. And it was all because they had their own security policies, but they weren't compliant with their own security policy. Sorry for jumping back, but I was hoping to find that particular instance. So again, we can help you as far as we can, but without you having actual access to all of your information, it would be hard to be predictive, but the rest of it can definitely be handled remotely. At that point, are there any questions? And Gavin, I'll leave it to you to repeat them.
Yeah. Thank you, Jeff. We will go ahead and look for questions.
I thought I was.
Yeah, there is a little more echo. Okay, let me handle this. Good evening, all. My name is Harish. I work with Parity as Director Strategic Partnerships. Now is the time for question and answer with Jeff. It could be anything related to cybersecurity in the area that Jeff is. Jeff is our, as we introduced, Jeff is our cybersecurity director. During this presentation, any of the questions that you came across, you can type or you can unmute yourself and then ask this question.
I assume we don't have, I think there are no questions. Probably, Jeff, can you go ahead with the frequently asked questions by some of our clients so that it could correlate? If you have any, probably we can go over that.
Sure. So many of the frequently asked questions, I just had one. Basically, the organization, the company, did not realize the expense and detail and length of setting up their own security operations center. We had a meeting and discussed their goals. The only problem is they didn't realize that when most people talk about a security operations center, it's 24/365. They were thinking they could do it with 6 people. Obviously, they can't. The other thing, too, is they hadn't organized a compliance program yet. So the learning for them was basically the order of operations for doing something like that. Was basically organizing what you have, making sure what you have is completely up to date. And then while you're doing that, have the people who are going to be part of the operation trained. Because there are certain things that you need to know. You need to have somebody who's a certified ethical hacker. You need to have an audit person. You need to have people who are trained in SOC operations. And so they pretty much went into it blind. And we actually ended up setting them with a 18-month startup, and with another 4 months of test before they actually went into full operation. Another issue that I've encountered this year is talking with a government organization, and they were one of the organizations that had to do with FedRAMP, and they also did not know how many people that they needed, and they were also new to following that. So we had to go in and have another lengthy conversation with, how do you need to do training? How do you interface with, that branch of the government in order to add them on? This was actually a vendor, it wasn't part of the government. And there were other issues last year with a penetration test where we did the penetration test, told them what to fix, they fixed it, but they ended up getting phishing scams and those types of things, responded to them very well, but they didn't enforce the same level to their third-party contractors. So the third-party risk situation was actually something that ended up getting the person in to the network. So, that kind of went to doing third-party risk, doing the working from home thing with the members of the family or your friends being there while you're working on something. But that's third-party risk, but that's not the third-party risk that they detected. It was actually somebody who was their supplier and had access using a VPN. And the VPN was compromised because it was being accessed remotely from the web, and it actually suffered from a man-in-the-middle attack. And that pretty much covers the variety of things that have been experienced in the past year and few months. Back to you, Kevin.
Yeah, thanks, Jeff. So we'll take again if probably anyone has any questions. I think, Jeff, is there anything else you want to cover before I wrap up?
Gavin, Jeff, there are a couple of questions in the chat.
Okay.
There's a question from Martel. I do have one question. I'm studying for the CEH. Are you aware of the black box Linux operating system, and will you recommend this software?
I'm sorry, there was a lot of echo in your question.
Okay. I do have one question. I'm studying for the CEH. Are you aware of the black box Linux operating system, and will you recommend this software? This is from Martel.
I'm aware of it. I can't say I've ever used it. But like I mentioned before, if you're studying for the CEH, then actually everything you need is going to be in the new version of Kali Linux. With the exception of doing black holing for a network and denial of service, an understanding of the denial of service. So I would actually recommend that you go with a new version of Kali because it's going to be more useful to you in your studies. And actually, when you go into some of the classes, that's going to be what they use. So I would definitely go that way.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that, Jeff. Arish, do you see any more questions?
Yes, Kevin. I think there is a question from Emma Edwards. Would you like to explain that?
I'm unable to see those questions. Probably if you.
Okay. Yeah, the question is, we are a fintech company, operates entirely on Amazon Web Services. They already provide us security from the air end. Do we really need external party to audit our security levels?
Yes, especially since you're a fintech company. You are going to have to do basically a pen test. And in some cases, since you're on AWS, the pen test is going to actually have to come from them to a point and then do what you can do from the outside. But depending on what you mean by fintech, you're also going to have to do other types of audits. So you may have PCI DSS that has to be done, and that's going to be at a corporate level. PCI DSS is going to require you to have the pen test. And based on what other information you have, you could have, Sarbanes-Oxley, any of those other things. We don't really focus on SOX. And since I was mainly work for the government, I haven't had to dive deep into that as well. But yes, you were going to have to follow the standards. And actually, the one thing that I didn't mention is last year, many people who jumped over to AWS actually had misconfigurations, and it ended up allowing a lot of user ID passwords to be linked. So you're definitely going to have to work with Amazon Web Services to do anything, but they'll be very willing to help you, especially during a pen test type operation.
Yeah, I hope that answers your question, Emma. Do you see any more questions, Arish?
No questions, Gavin. I think we should be going forward and concluding the presentation.
Yeah.
Concluding the webinar.
Jeff, do you have anything to add before I wrap up?
No, sir. I think I've covered.
Okay, fine. And thank you, everyone. We appreciate you being here. I hope today's learnings will help you stay vigilant from cyber threats. We will get in touch with you the feedback form, and this recording will be uploaded to our website www.sparity.com. Also, along with the feedback form, probably I'll include the recording of this link. So thanks again for your time, and we will see you next time again.